May 1450. Sultan Murad II, the man who had reconquered most of the Balkans, who had crushed the Crusaders at Varna, who had ruled the most powerful empire in the known world for nearly 30 years, arrived in Albania with 100,000 soldiers. Not a general, not a deputy, not a trusted commander who had embarrassed himself in the mountains the last time and needed to be replaced. The Sultan himself, in person, with the full weight of the Ottoman Imperial Army behind him. He had one objective: take the fortress of Cluj, destroy Skanderbeg's base of operations. And this, he would spend 5 months trying. He would lose 20,000 men. He would go home without the fortress. And he would die a few months later, whether from the humiliation, from illness, from the accumulated weight of a campaign that the most powerful ruler in the known world had personally led and personally failed. Historians disagree. But Murad II never took Cluj, and Skanderbeg made sure every person in Europe knew it. This is the story of how one man held a mountain fortress against 100,000 soldiers, and why it changed everything. Before we get into the siege, if you haven't watched episodes 1 and 2, go back. The story of how Skanderbeg built what he's now defending matters enormously for understanding what this episode is about. Subscribe, like the video, and let's get into it. Because this is the episode where Murad II makes the worst decision of his reign. Between Torviol in June 1444 and the Great Siege of 1450, Skanderbeg fought and won battles that most history books don't even record individually, because there were so many of them that cataloging each one would take longer than the battles themselves. October 1445. The Battle of Mokra. The Ottomans, humiliated at Torviol, came back within months with a new force. Skanderbeg met them at Mokra and destroyed them with the same combination of terrain selection and ambush that had worked at Torviol. Different ground, same principle. He knew Albanian terrain in a way that no Ottoman commander sent from Skopje or Adrianople would ever know it. That asymmetry was a weapon he used every single time. September 1446. The Battle of Odenit in Upper Dibra. Mustafa Pasha, with 15,000 Ottoman cavalry, ordered specifically to fight a war of attrition, to pillage and terrorize the countryside rather than engage Skanderbeg directly, because the Ottomans had by now learned that engaging Skanderbeg directly in Albanian terrain produced predictable results. Skanderbeg didn't wait for the pillaging to continue. He found Mustafa's divided force, hit the exposed contingent at Odenit, and destroyed it completely. 5,000 Ottoman dead. 300 prisoners. The entire camp and its supplies captured. He fights like water, an Ottoman officer reportedly told Murad II, trying to explain why the standard approaches weren't working. You cannot hold him, you cannot predict him, and when you think you have him, he is somewhere else entirely. But it was not all victories. 1448. The fortress of Svetograd, one of Skanderbeg's most strategically important positions, controlling the approach from Macedonia, fell to the Ottomans. Not through assault, through thirst. Barlady records that a dead dog was found in the castle well. The Albanian garrison, refusing to drink water that might corrupt their souls, held out as long as they could before the lack of potable water made the fortress untenable. An Ottoman chronicler writing closer to the events suggests a different explanation, that Ottoman forces found and cut the water sources feeding the castle from outside. Either way, the result was the same. The garrison surrendered under terms. Murad II, to his credit, honored the condition of safe passage, and Skanderbeg lost Svetograd. A significant loss. A controlled one in the sense that his men survived. But a loss. We will take it back, Skanderbeg told his commanders. He did not say when. By 1450, Murad II had had enough of sending generals to Albania. The pattern was clear and it was humiliating. An Ottoman army would enter Albanian territory. Skanderbeg would find it, choose his ground, apply his tactics, and destroy it or bleed it until it withdrew. The empire was absorbing losses, not catastrophic in absolute terms for an empire the size of the Ottoman state, but consistent enough and embarrassing enough and well-publicized enough across Europe that they were becoming a problem. The Pope was using Skanderbeg's victories in fundraising appeals for crusade support. Venice was watching carefully and recalculating the value of the Albanian buffer zone. John Hunyadi in Hungary was in direct correspondence with Skanderbeg, discussing coordination. Word of what was happening in these mountains was circulating in every court in Europe, and it was doing the kind of damage to Ottoman prestige that military losses alone couldn't fully explain. Murad made his decision. He would go himself. He assembled a force that Barlady estimates at 100,000 men and modern historians consider plausible given the strategic importance Murad placed on the campaign. Infantry. Sipahi cavalry. Janissaries. The elite corps that represented the absolute best the Ottoman military had to offer. Artillery. A full siege train. Engineers. He marched into Albania in the spring of 1450 with the full intention of ending this in a single campaign. Skanderbeg did not meet him in the field. He couldn't. 100,000 soldiers was not a force he could engage in the ambush and terrain tactics that had worked against armies of 25 or 40,000. Against that number on any ground, the mathematics didn't work. He knew it. He had spent 20 years in the Ottoman military. He understood exactly what 100,000 Ottoman soldiers properly deployed could do. So he did something else entirely. He put his best troops inside Cluj, under the command of a garrison commander named Vrana Conti, a man chosen with the specific care that Skanderbeg applied to every personnel decision, a man who could hold walls under pressure for months, and he took the rest of his army into the mountains. Not to hide. To work. Cluj sits on a rocky spur of Mount Skanderbeg, approximately 600 meters above the Albanian lowlands, with sheer drops on three sides and a single viable approach from the northeast. The fortress itself, stone walls, towers, a cistern that had been carefully maintained and defended ever since the lesson of Svetograd, had been reinforced by Skanderbeg in the years since his return. He had studied fortification in the Ottoman system. He knew what sieges looked like from the attacking side. He built his defenses accordingly. Murad arrived and looked at it. Then he began digging in for a siege. The Ottoman camp that surrounded Cluj in the spring of 1450 was enormous, large enough to house 100,000 men, with supply lines stretching back through Albanian territory toward Macedonia, with artillery positions established on the heights that could reach the outer walls, with engineering units working on approach trenches that would allow the army to get close enough for direct assault. It was a textbook Ottoman siege operation. Organized, systematic, patient. Inside the walls, Vrana Conti looked at the size of the Ottoman camp and sent a message to Skanderbeg in the mountains. "We can hold," the message said according to Barlady, "but not forever. How long do you need?" Skanderbeg's reply was characteristically direct. "Hold until I tell you to stop holding." While Vrana Conti held the walls of Cluj against the full weight of the Ottoman siege, Skanderbeg was conducting a completely different kind of war in the mountains surrounding the plain. His force, several thousand cavalry, mobile, fast, knowing every path in these mountains, attacked the Ottoman supply lines with a consistency and ferocity that the siege commanders inside their enormous camp had no good answer to. Supply convoys moving from Macedonia toward Cluj were hit. Ottoman foraging parties sent into the surrounding countryside for food and fodder were destroyed. Units detached from the main camp to secure the approach roads found Skanderbeg's cavalry waiting for them in passes and valleys and mountain forests where the superiority of Ottoman numbers became irrelevant. "He is everywhere and nowhere," wrote one Ottoman commander in a dispatch that survived in Ottoman archives. "We send 500 men to secure a road and they do not return. We send 1,000 and they find nothing. We send 500 again the next day and they do not return." The supply situation in the Ottoman camp began to deteriorate. 100,000 men eat an enormous amount, and an army that cannot forage safely and whose supply convoys are being regularly destroyed runs through its reserves faster than anyone plans for. The soldiers in the camp were eating. But they were eating less well than they had at the start, and they had been here for months, and the fortress on the rock above them had not fallen, and their commander was the Sultan himself who had staked his personal prestige on taking this place. The assaults on the walls continued. Barlady records them in detail. Attacks on specific sections of the fortification, the defenders repelling them with the particular ferocity of men who know that the terms of surrender for a garrison that has made a sultan work this hard will not be favorable. Vrana Conti moved his men along the walls with the efficiency of a commander who has thought carefully about where the pressure will come and prepositioned his resources accordingly. Ottoman losses mounted. Barlady's figure of 20,000 dead over the course of the siege is the number that has entered historical memory, and while it may be on the higher end of what modern historians find plausible, the reality of significant Ottoman casualties, from the assaults, from the supply war in the mountains, from the disease that always accompanied extended sieges, is not in dispute. 5 months. That is how long Murad II sat outside Cluj with 100,000 soldiers and watched the fortress not fall. The autumn of 1450 brought rain. Then cold. The Albanian mountains in winter are not a hospitable environment for an army that has been in the field for months, whose supply lines are being systematically destroyed, and whose morale has been ground down by repeated failed assaults on walls that simply will not break. Murad made his decision. He broke the siege, ordered the withdrawal. The enormous Ottoman camp was dismantled. The army that had come to end Skanderbeg's rebellion in a single campaign began the long march back toward Macedonia. Inside the walls of Cluj, Vrana Conti watched them go. Then he sent a message to Skanderbeg in the mountains. They are leaving. Skanderbeg rode his cavalry down from the high passes and hit the Ottoman rear guard as it withdrew, standard practice for a commander who understood that a retreating army, relieved and moving and thinking about getting home, is more vulnerable than a sieging army that is focused and dug in. More Ottoman casualties. More supplies captured. The withdrawal that had already been a humiliation became something worse. When the news reached Rome, Pope Nicholas V, who had succeeded Eugenius IV, issued a formal letter praising Skanderbeg with language that has come down through history because of how extraordinary it was. He called him the defender of Christendom. He called his victory a miracle. When the news reached the courts of Europe, that the Sultan himself had come with 100,000 men and gone home with nothing, something shifted in the calculation of every monarch watching the Ottoman advance. And in Adrianople, Murad II, who had ruled the empire for nearly 30 years and had never before failed at something he had personally committed to, fell ill. He died on February 3, 1451. His son was 19 years old. His son's name was Mehmed. The Sultan who built the siege came home without the fortress. And then he died. His 19-year-old son inherited the Ottoman Empire, inherited the Albanian problem, and inherited a specific piece of unfinished business that his father had not been able to close. If you know who Mehmed II is, if you know what he did 2 years after this, you already know that the next chapter of this story is something else entirely. Subscribe. Like the video. Because episode 4 is where this gets truly extraordinary. The siege of Cluj in 1450 was not the largest battle of Skanderbeg's career. It was not the most tactically innovative. It was not the engagement that military historians point to when they discuss his genius as a commander. It was the most important. Because what Skanderbeg defended at Cluj was not just a fortress. He defended the idea that the Ottoman Empire could be stopped. That its advance was not inevitable. That a small, poor, mountainous territory with no natural allies and no significant outside support could hold the most powerful military force in the known world at bay, not once but twice and then again and again for 25 years. Every Albanian lord who had doubted the League of Lycia, who had wondered whether unity was worth the compromises it required, whether Skanderbeg was the right man to organize it around, whether resistance was genuinely possible or just a slower form of defeat, had his answer after 1450. Every European monarch who had been watching from a cautious distance began moving closer. Venice, which had been playing both sides with the careful commercial pragmatism that characterized its foreign policy, entered into a formal alliance with Skanderbeg in 1451. Not from idealism. From the very practical recognition that this man was going to keep fighting regardless of whether Venice helped him, and that being on his side when this eventually resolved itself was a better position than being neutral. Alfonso V of Aragon and Naples, who controlled significant territory in southern Italy and had a direct strategic interest in what happened across the Adriatic, sent troops and money. The Pope kept writing letters and sending funds. Skanderbeg accepted all of it. He needed all of it. Because the man who had just inherited the Ottoman Empire was not going to accept what his father had failed to finish. April 6, 1453. Mehmed II, 19 years old when his father died, 21 now, began the siege of Constantinople with an army that made the force his father had brought to Cluj look modest. Massive cannons specifically designed to break walls that no previous weapon could breach. A navy to cut off supply by sea. A land army surrounding the city on every side. Constantinople had stood for over 1,000 years. It fell on May 29, 1453, 53 days after the siege began. The news reached Skanderbeg in Albania and every court in Europe, with the particular terror of something that everyone had known was coming but had somehow not quite believed until the moment it arrived. The city has fallen, his advisor told him, standing in the hall at Cluj. Skanderbeg said nothing for a long moment. Then he will come here next, he said finally. He was right. But not immediately. Mehmed had other things to finish first. Hungary, Serbia. The consolidation of what Constantinople's fall had made possible. He would come to Albania. But he would take his time. And Skanderbeg used every year of that time.